So it's a little bit, it may sound a little bit like hyperbole to say someone has an extraordinary career, but it seems to me that that's the right phrase for Stephen Koonin. Just a real quick laundry list of his career activities: former Undersecretary of Energy for Science, then to the Institute for Defense Analysis. Prior to that, Chief Scientist for BP. All of this was after 29-year career at the California Institute of Technology, including 9 years as provost, a professor of a topic that I can hardly go a day without reading about: theoretical physics. Thank you. You could look at me and know that that wasn't really true, couldn't you? And as of April of last year, became director of NYU's Center for Urban Science and Progress. I believe that President Sexton brought him in to be a change agent, and let's see what he's up to at NYU. Dr. Koonin.
Thank you. So in the usual or normal flow of events, I'd be speaking to you tomorrow, but given schedule constraints, I get to preview the geek's view of the city for you, about which you will hear much more tomorrow. As was mentioned, I'm the founding director of the Center for Urban Science and Progress. We are part of the New York City Applied Sciences Initiative. We were announced last April. And the first winner of the competition was Cornell and Technion, who are building a piece of a good research university on Roosevelt Island. CUSP aspires to be a very different organization. We are mission-driven in research and education, aiming not just for relevance, but also for impact in the city. We sit firmly at the intersection of big cities and big data. This audience, I don't need to explain why cities are important, but let me say a word about big data. The world's informatics capabilities are exploding exponentially. That graph shows that traffic on the internet is growing at 30% a year. And 2 years from now, there will be twice as many devices connected to the net as there are people on the planet. We're getting very good at storing, transmission, analysis of data, and we're seeing a proliferation in society of static and mobile sensors, as well as connection of things to the net, as well as people. As a scientist, I look at the city as an object of study and ask, what does it mean to instrument a city? I want to know about the infrastructure, the condition of the infrastructure and its operations, whether it's the roads, the grid, the pipeline system, water, rubbish, etc. Second, I'd like to know about the environment. The meteorology, obviously, pollution, noise, flora, fauna, what's going on in the natural part of the city. And then finally, in order to fully understand the city, we need to know about the people. Cities are built by people. They're operated, if you like, for people. And so studying people in cities is a structural part of the subject. If I were to take off all privacy constraints, and let me assure you, and I'm happy to answer questions later, privacy is very much in our thinking and built into the organization. I'd like to know about relationships between people, where they are, the economic and communications activities, their health, their nutrition, their opinions, the organization, and so on. And the premise behind CUSP is that if we can properly acquire, integrate, and analyze such data, we can take government beyond imperfect understanding. And believe me, having spent some time in Washington, I say that phrase with some experience. We can make city operations better and more efficient. We can do a better job of planning, and we can do a better job of formulating policy. We can also improve governance and citizen engagement, and we can enable the private sector to develop new services and products to serve citizens, the government, and other firms. And then finally, equally exciting to me as a scientist is that we can enable a revolution that's going on already in the social sciences. A lot of social science now involves taking surveys of perhaps, if you're lucky, 10,000 people, and then carefully analyzing the results. Technologies that we have now allow us to acquire data on 500,000 or 1 million people more or less at once, essentially removing the statistical uncertainty from social science work. So let's talk a minute about where we get our data from in cities. There are the usual organic data flows that many people trained in the study of cities think of first. Administrative records, census, permits, transactions perhaps, sales, communications, operational data, like how is traffic flowing, how is the transit system working, utility data, health system, and so on. And then more recently, we've seen the rise of Twitter feeds, blog posts, Facebook, and so on, giving us some insight, additionally, beyond these records into what's going on. But we're starting to see, as I mentioned, new kinds of sensors distributed throughout the city. Personal sensors, people wearing Fitbit, things of that sort. Fixed in situ sensors. There are 30 million surveillance cameras in the country, 1 for every 10 people, essentially all of the data going on the floor. We have the opportunity to crowdsource sensing through phones, and then we have sensors at choke points, whether it's RFID on toll gates or portals through which people have to pass. But if a physicist looks at this, there's even more. We have opportunities for novel sensing technologies, imagery in various spectral bands, radar, LiDAR, gravity, magnetic, and so on. In fact, it feels like these kinds of technologies allow us to acquire data on cities with unprecedented granularity, coverage, and variety, making cities a whole new subject of study from what they were even 5 years ago. In many ways, it feels like Galileo first turning the telescope on the heavens, or Van Leeuwenhoek first looking at a living cell in a microscope. What I'd like to do in the next couple minutes is just give you a tour through some of the kinds of data that we either have in CUSP or expect to have, and then I'll tell you a bit about the organization itself. I'll start with some city records data. This is the noise report map for 311 calls. 311 is the complaint line for the city for non-emergency calls. About 1/3 of the calls have to do with noise in one way or the other. This is just a heat map of where those calls occur. We are let's see, where are we? Right here, right now. I live over here, and I can tell you that each of these red spots, except for that one, is located near particular drinking establishments that let out at certain. This one is the Arch, where there's lots of music that goes on at various times. So, here's one source of data that can be used to understand and presumably improve the city. Here's a serendipitous source of data. Foursquare, for those of you above a certain age, is a social media app that allows users to declare their location to their friends and, of course, to the Foursquare company. And if you look at 3 successive hours on a Monday afternoon, 4 p.m., 5 p.m., 6 p.m. in January, a couple years ago, you can see the check-ins moving around the city as people move from their work to the entertainment districts. We have data on taxi rides. The Taxi and Limousine Commission has provided us with 3 years' worth of data on every taxi ride that was taken in the city in each of those years. That's 180 million rides a year, so about 550 million rides total. And we have the GPS start and stop coordinates, the time, the fare, and the tip for each one of those rides. And so that starts to be interesting big data, 600 million rides roughly. You can start to understand the city in ways you might not have been able to before. For example, this simply shows the number of rides per day for every day in 2011. And you can see the weekly cycle, low on Sundays and high on Fridays. You can see events happen like Christmas, the hurricane having blown through, vacations setting in August, half marathon running in April, and so on. A wonderful way of seeing one part of the pulse of the city, the normal pattern against which anomalies will occur. You can also get economic data or economic insight out of this. If you segregate out the airports from the train stations and just look at the number of trips that come from the airports and train stations for 1 week in May, about 3.5 million trips. You see the daily pattern for the airports and train stations, but also that there are more trips out of the train stations than out of the airports. The tips, however, are inverted, that the tips are bigger out of the airports than they are out of the train stations. If you're a taxi driver, you presumably know this intuitively, but it's really interesting to see the repetition of the regular pattern. And eventually, as we start to acquire more data, how does the tip rate depend upon the wealth of the neighborhood at which you're dropped off? Or how does it depend upon the weather, for example? Are people feeling more generous when it's sunny, et cetera, et cetera? Let me show you a different kind of data collection. This is a thermal infrared image of Manhattan. It's an image of a piece of lower Manhattan. That's the Brooklyn Bridge. We're looking from Brooklyn. And there are a number of features of this image that are both interesting and suggestive of what might be done. If you look, for example, at this building over here, which is an apartment building, basically you can understand the energy use, the insulation in each one of the apartments. If you look at this building over here, it's got a data center in it, and so it's hot on the bottom and hot on the top where the vents are. And if you look at this cluster of buildings over here, the Alfred E. Smith public houses, they're glowing hot. The reason being that the temperature control is awful in the apartments, and they just turn on the heat and everybody opens the windows. City manages that building, right? What's interesting about this, and in other modes that we can use, whether it's hyperspectral to look at particular molecular species like CO2 or methane or radar or LIDAR, is that it's one sensor, one camera in this case, covering many people, 100,000 people perhaps in this picture, and looking at them persistently, round the clock, hour by hour, understanding patterns of energy use, helping manage emergencies, detecting pollution, patterns of activity, and so on. It's a very different way of looking at cities than the conventional records or even the in situ sensors. Now, let me say then a few words about CUSP. We are a partnership, 6 universities led by NYU and NYU Poly, together with the universities listed there, a set of industrial partners, the lead partners being IBM, Microsoft, Xerox, sustaining partners being Cisco, National Grid, Con Ed, Siemens, Lutron, who make 40% of the world's lighting controls, have a great interest in energy efficiency, and then a set of consultancies, including IDEO, who's here. When I came in, I thought it was very important to bring in the national laboratories, who have unparalleled skills in modeling, data analysis, and sensors. And so we have part of the consortium, Lawrence Livermore, Los Alamos, Sandia National Laboratories, and Brookhaven National Lab. And then finally, uniquely, the city and state agencies are partners with us. 13 of the city agencies listed there, from buildings to environment to fire, transportation, NYPD. The Metropolitan Transit Authority, for those of you out of town, you should know that they run the subways and the buses, and then the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. What we get from these different partners is, of course, different depending on the partner, but it's faculty or staff, students, computing cycles, hardware development, data sets, access to other partners. The scale of the ambition is as follows. Within the next 10 years, we'll have 50 full-time senior researchers, 30 faculty, 20 industrial and laboratory folks, 30 postdocs, 400 master's students, and 100 PhD candidates. We are and will be located in downtown Brooklyn, right now in 30,000 square feet of leased space in Metrotech, another 30,000 square feet coming online in about a year and a half. And then 4 years from now, we'll be in 1/3 roughly of that building, which is the old headquarters of the subway system, which NYU is in the process of completely renovating. Budget will run to $70 million a year, a mix of university, tuition, foundation, and federal funding. when one tells the story to the federal, actually to any of those funders, it really resonates. New tools to deal with the social problems in cities, and conversely, new approaches to deal with the social problems if you're talking to a socially oriented foundation. We have a graduate program starting in December. We advertised a one-year master's program in applied urban science and informatics. We got about 155 applications, which closed about a month ago. We have admitted 36 of them. We will see a class probably of about 23 students starting in August. The curriculum is a mix of informatics courses, about 25% of that, 25% urban domains, health, energy, utilities, transport, and so on. And then about 50% of a project of some kind, and I'll talk about the projects in a moment. It's a really interesting class of folks. On average, they've been out from undergraduate studies for about 4 to 5 years. About half of them are computer scientists and engineers, another 20% roughly environmental scientists, another 25% social scientists, and then the odd MD or even an artist whom we felt was quantitative enough to want to deal with and depict the infrastructure of the city. Because we aspire to be not just a job shop, it's important to have a set of core capabilities and facilities in the organization, and we are in the process of defining and standing these up. One of them is a data warehouse with the appropriate access protections, technologies, and infrastructure to be the repository for both proprietary, closed, and open data for the city. And in fact, we're in the process of getting a large download of data from the city. The second is Urban Observatory to demonstrate and exploit the kind of synoptic imagery that I showed you in the thermal infrared pictures. The third is to create a high-resolution, validated, integrated model of the city, which I like to call SimCity for real, to correlate all of this data and hopefully provide some predictive capabilities, if not just understanding. And then finally, what we call quantified community, which is a real community of 5,000 to 10,000 people that are, of course, with their permission, fully instrumented. And so that we will know everything about their activities, energy use, the way in which the building operates, and so on. A wonderful test bed for new technologies and behavioral interventions. Some of the projects we're working on are just to make the city data sets clean and working with one another. We do that for the open data sets. It will make it public and great service to the community and, of course, to the city as well. The second is to perform multi-data correlations to improve city resource allocation. I'm not going to go through that in any detail, but Mike Flowers will be here tomorrow, and you might ask him about that if he doesn't tell you about it. One of the big physical projects that we are in the process of standing up is the noise project. As I mentioned, noise is a big complaint in the city. Can we go out and measure it? Can we characterize it? Is it traffic? Is it wind? Is it construction? Is it HVAC? And then do something about its enforcement. We're also after synoptic measurements of pollution in the city. We have some ideas of novel sensing of public health. Paul Romer mentioned the 4 pounds of bacteria that live in each one of us and that we feed every day, 3 times a day. Well, there is information in that bacteria about nutrition, about health status, about drug use. We may even be able to tell the mayor how much sugar people are eating, which he seems quite interested in. So we've got a project basically to do the metagenome of the city. We think we can do something about parking. I'm not at liberty right now to say what, but it would be a good thing if we can do that. And then building energy efficiency. We've got a good, strong program already working on that. Finally, let me conclude with what does success look like after 5 years. We'd like to define and elaborate what this thing urban science really is, to create a vibrant world-class center pursuing that subject, implementing the facilities and nucleating a community of researchers actually among our whole partnership. Execute maybe 4 projects that have a demonstrable impact upon the city and its citizens. Establish CUSP as a trusted partner for the city, train several hundred people in this new field, commercialize some technologies that we will have developed, perhaps through our large industrial partners, bring new tools to the social sciences, and then after a few years, begin to franchise the brand globally. With that, thank you for your attention. There's our website, and we may have time for one question, perhaps, huh? Okay, thank you. Yeah?
Very exciting, thank you. The American Council for Energy Efficient Economy has linked with New Urbanism recently about the absence of studying clusters of buildings, whether it's urban heat island effect, energy use, and on the neighborhood scale, it's quite interesting. So I'm curious where your data might connect with that topic.
You know, that's really interesting. We can look at clusters through the meter readings, assuming we'll get that from Con Ed. We can look at them with the sensors. How often do they keep their lights on? How do they do in terms of the heating compared to buildings that aren't clustered and so on? So as in many things, having the data in a sufficient granularity and sufficient coverage lets you start to answer those questions in a quantitative way, and we can understand how big the effects really are. So yeah, we're not up and running yet, but that's certainly something we can and should look at. Okay, thank you very much.